Before we begin today, I just want to acknowledge the fact that this channel has taken a pretty drastic turn in the last couple months. We did used to do a lot of those Reddit stories, and I don't know, ever since we started this Forbidden Knowledge Iceberg, I've really felt that this channel has more of a sort of a good purpose. Like, I feel like we're talking about a lot of really important things that are not discussed enough in today's society. Anyways, all of this is just to say thank you so much for supporting these videos that I feel have a little bit more of a greater purpose. And hopefully we can all learn something and be a little bit more aware of all of the dark things that are happening around us every single day. Project ECHELON. World War II has just come to a close. The world is fractured, and the Cold War has begun brewing, with intelligence as the ultimate weapon. The United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, known as the Five Eyes, forge a secret pact called the UK-USA Agreement in 1947, with the goal of sharing intelligence and keeping tabs on the Soviet Union and its allies. This leads to the establishment of Project ECHELON, a surveillance network unlike anything the world has seen before, created in 1971. ECHELON wasn't just about spying on foreign powers. It was about total information dominance on a global scale. Using a worldwide network of listening posts like Menwith Hill in the UK, Misawa Air Base in Japan, and Geraldton in Australia, ECHELON was capable of intercepting virtually any electronic communication at the time. Phone calls, faxes, satellite transmissions, it didn't matter. Just about anything had the potential of being captured and recorded. By 1988, reports suggested it could tap into 1 billion calls a year just in the UK. Massive antennas and supercomputers would constantly sift through this flood of data, searching for flagged keywords or phrases. From what we know about the project, reports from the late 1990s and early 2000s suggest that ECHELON had been capable of targeting individuals using voice recognition software all the way back then. A former NSA analyst named Perry Felwak, under the pseudonym Winslow Peck, tried to blow the whistle. In an article titled U.S. Electronic Espionage, a memoir, Felwak discussed a global network of listening posts operated by the NSA. The craziest part about this is that at the time, the NSA wasn't even publicly acknowledged by the government yet, and sat as one of the most secretive US intelligence agencies. As a result, this single interview exposed the very existence of the NSA for the very first time, which prior to this operated completely in the shadows. One of the most astonishing claims that he made was that the NSA's budget actually exceeded that of the Central Intelligence Agency, which was an absolutely insane claim at the time. What, this unknown US intelligence agency that nobody has ever heard of has more taxpayer funding than the freaking CIA? No way. With that, the US government denied all of his claims, and the revelations were largely disregarded as conspiracy theories by the public, even though it was all true. Every word. In 1988, another whistleblower, Margaret Newsom, a Lockheed employee under NSA contract, told Congress about the program's existence. Still, officially, ECHELON didn't exist. However, as always, the truth would eventually rise to the surface. In the year 2000, 60 Minutes broadcast a report simply titled ECHELON, which would expose the global surveillance network as a legitimate international government operation. Correspondent Steve Croft interviewed Mike Frost, a former Canadian intelligence agent, who detailed ECHELON's operations. intercepting phone calls, emails, and faxes worldwide, and analyzing them using supercomputers to hunt for keywords. The report brought very significant privacy concerns to light, exemplified by a woman's innocent call being flagged after she explained over the phone how her son had bombed in a play. The European Parliament launched an investigation in 2000, and their report in 2001 confirmed that ECHELON was real, operated by the Five Eyes, and was capable of intercepting and analyzing communications across telephone networks and satellite transmissions. Ground stations used all those years ago are still operational, part of a silent global listening network that's very likely still capable of tapping into any and all communication you might send over the internet or your phone. Now, knowing that this unprecedented amount of data was collected since the Cold War and is surely still being collected through more modern programs, imagine the possibilities that this data could have if it were used to train AI models to predict human behavior at scales that we can't even begin to comprehend. We're talking likely hundreds of billions of phone calls, emails, and texts, all of which could be fed into algorithms to map out how people think, act, and react. Intelligence agencies could use this to predict everything from political movements to public reactions to individual decisions. The fact that the public is only just receiving access to AI means the government has likely been toying with it for some time now. So what does this all mean for us? What it means is that the Five Eyes have been watching, are still watching, and that their tools are more sophisticated than ever. As we stand at the crossroads between AI and global surveillance, we're reminded of that same age-old question: where does the line stand between security and freedom? How much privacy are we willing to sacrifice, and at what point are we going to realize that that term, security, may just be a pseudonym for control? Palantir and automated authoritarianism. With the backdrop of Project ECHELON set up, along with the other surveillance programs we've discussed in the iceberg, like PRISM, I'd like to hone in on a relatively new chapter in this story. Palantir Technologies. You might have heard of them recently on social media or in your news feeds. This is arguably one of the most disturbing companies operating in America today. They specialize in artificial intelligence and mass surveillance, and have built a massive business on their ability to see, know, and predict basically everything. This isn't just about data, it's about control, surveillance, and the erosion of our privacy, something we might be neglecting to recognize the importance of until it's gone. And if that happens, there won't be any going back. Palantir very recently has offered the government the opportunity to take the information they collect to a whole new level of utility than they have been capable of in the past. By employing artificial intelligence, Palantir is able to analyze and cross-reference all of the data the US government has collected across its different agencies. Many fear that this data could be used to convert their raw surveillance data into a highly detailed library of profiles of every single citizen of the United States. Palantir's tools, Gotham and Foundry, are the engines behind these capabilities. Gotham, built for intelligence and defense, can sift through satellite imagery, social media information, and classified reports to track threats or targets. Of course, they claim that these threats boil down to terrorist organizations or hard criminals, but what happens when political factions begin to weaponize their power against dissidents, as we've observed in recent years. Foundry helps companies and now government agencies like the IRS and DHS organize massive data sets into something usable. Together, they're like a supercomputer capable of analyzing your entire life along with everyone else's and predicting your next move before you can even make it. They already know those restaurants or cafes you frequent, where and when you work, what information you're researching online, and now they can begin to take action based on that information. This year, in 2025, the US government began leaning hard into this technology with contracts worth over $1 billion, including a massive $795 million deal for the Army's Maven smart system. In March, President Trump signed an executive order pushing federal agencies to share data, breaking down silos to make the government more efficient. And Palantir's Foundry is the backbone of this plan. It's pulling data from places like the Social Security Administration, the IRS, and the Department of Homeland Security, factoring in everything from your bank account details to your medical claims to your disability status. The New York Times reported that Palantir has raked in over $113 million in federal contracts since January of 2025 alone, and they're in talks to expand even further. Back in the Cold War, ECHELON was in fact scooping up large swaths of communications, but analyzing that data was like finding a needle in a haystack. PRISM, exposed by Edward Snowden, took things further by grabbing data from tech giants like Facebook, Google, Apple, and Microsoft, but both of these programs were limited by the technology of their time. We are now entering the age of artificial intelligence, and as earth-shattering as it has already become, we are only in its infancy. This is the computer age equivalent of the mainframes which utilized tape drives and punch cards in the 60s and 70s. Look at how far things have come since then. Look at how primitive these computers are by today's standards, really just a couple decades ahead. A relatively short period of time in modern history. In comparison, imagine where this technology will lead in a decade or two. Imagine how powerful it will be. Palantir's AI can process these massive data sets in real time, finding patterns and making predictions down to the level of individuals. It's not just about spying anymore, it's about knowing you better than you know yourself and acting on that information. Your free will itself may be compromised simply due to the ability of artificial intelligence to outsmart and predict your next move at every turn. With Gotham and Foundry, the government could use your social media posts, your financial history, even your health records to build a profile that flags you as a risk based on your race, religion, or your social or political views. Some fear that Palantir, backed by the United States, will be capable of building a nationwide social credit system tied to digital money and health records to control dissent for the government. Imagine a world where your tweet about a protest or your donation to a controversial cause lands you on an actionable watch list governed by AI, making automated decisions based on your social media watch history. Palantir itself, of course, denies building a mega database for surveillance, insisting clients control the data. But the capability is certainly there, and their complete lack of transparency, being a corporation and not a government agency accountable to the people, is making citizens nervous. Then there's the leadership, and this is where, just when you think it can't get any more wild, it gets significantly more wild. Peter Thiel, Palantir's co-founder, is a billionaire with financial ties to Jeffrey Epstein, who invested $40 million in Thiel's Valar Ventures in 2015 and 2016. That investment, now worth $170 million to Jeffrey Epstein's estate, wasn't disclosed until this year in 2025. Is it possible that this was just a business dealing? Sure, maybe, whatever. It's all just a bunch of coincidences, right? Here's a fun interview clip from him where he's asked by a New York Times columnist if he would like to see the human race survive or perish.
Is it hype? Is it delusion? Is it something you worry about? I think you would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes?
I don't know. I would.
This is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit in this.
Should the human race survive?
Yes.
Okay.
But I also would I also would like us to radically solve these problems.
Right.
And so it's always, I don't know.
Next, of course, is the CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp.
Figured out that a few people get wealthy, and if you said platitudes that were obviously stupid, you could...
You're getting wealthy off of killing Palestinians. Palantir kills Palestinians with their AI and technology.
Oh.
You're killing my family in Palestine.
Yeah. And,
He's taken some wild stances, like calling pro-Palestinian protests a pagan religion and an infection in society. Oh, and there's that quote where he's fantasized about using drones to spray fentanyl-laced urine on analysts who cross him.
you need a higher purpose, and I also think you often need a lower purpose. Like the higher purpose for me...
What's a lower purpose?
Well, I love the idea of getting a drone and having light fentanyl-laced urine spraying on analysts who tried to screw us. So that's my lower purpose.
Adding to the list of sketchy players, as you might have already guessed, BlackRock, the mega investment firm we've covered in the previous video on elite corruption, of course owns roughly 188 million shares of Palantir, giving them something like 8.37% ownership of the company. In total, the shares are valued at around $16 billion of investment. Palantir's technology could enable predictive policing where algorithms decide who's a threat before a crime even happens. It could target people based on their beliefs or affiliations. With AI, the government could act on these profiles in real time, freezing accounts, denying benefits, or worse. Unlike ECHELON or PRISM, which were blunt instruments for information gathering, Palantir's AI is a scalpel capable of precise, devastating cuts. The American Civil Liberties Union and former employees of Palantir have been sounding the alarm, and protests like those blocking Palantir's New York City office show that people are fighting back. But unfortunately, it's not enough. Before it's too late, we need some transparency from Palantir and the US government so that we can understand what information they're actually collecting and how it's being used. We also need stronger privacy laws to hold companies and agencies like Palantir accountable. A company with this much influence can't just hide behind national security. We've played that game before, and we're not doing it again. Palantir's powerful AI tools, along with the government's wide repositories of information on its citizens, could turn our democracy into something unrecognizable. Wi-Fi routers create a 3D map of your home. Most people don't realize that Wi-Fi signals are capable of far more than transmitting data. When a Wi-Fi signal is sent out from your router, it doesn't just travel in a straight line to your device. It bounces off walls, furniture, and even people. These reflections carry a wealth of information about what's in the room. Information that, with the right technology, can be decoded to reveal the layout of your home and the presence of people within it. It's like turning your Wi-Fi router into a low-resolution camera that can see through walls. When Wi-Fi radio signals hit an object, some of the energy is absorbed, some is scattered, and some is reflected back. By analyzing these reflections, researchers have found ways to reconstruct the environment the router is in, and not just in a single room, but even throughout an entire household, through walls and floors. This isn't theoretical, it's already been demonstrated in real-world experiments. Scientists at Carnegie Mellon University developed a system using just 2 off-the-shelf Wi-Fi routers to track the 3D shape and positions of people through walls. They used a deep neural network called DensePose, developed by researchers at Imperial College London and Facebook AI, to interpret the signals, achieving accuracy comparable to traditional camera-based systems. In some cases, they could even identify specific individuals based on their unique movement patterns. Artificial intelligence is largely the reason why this is the first time we're seeing this Wi-Fi hardware being used in this way. It would be an understatement to say that decoding these signals is extremely complicated. The raw data from Wi-Fi reflections is a chaotic mess, influenced by everything in the room, from wall thickness to furniture placement. Advanced AI models, particularly deep learning algorithms, can sift through this data and identify patterns that indicate human presence, movement, or even specific activities. Researchers have shown that Wi-Fi signals can be used to map entire floors of buildings, creating detailed layouts that include furniture and other objects. In a 2017 study, scientists demonstrated the ability to generate 3D maps of rooms from outside of a building by analyzing how Wi-Fi signals bounce off various surfaces. Xfinity just rolled out Wi-Fi Motion, a security feature which uses your Wi-Fi gateway and existing connected devices to detect motion in your home. It works by sensing disruptions in the Wi-Fi signal between the gateway and your devices, like your smart TV or printer. When something moves, whether it's you, a pet, or even a burglar, it creates a disturbance in the signal, which the system interprets as motion. You can set up coverage zones, like near your front door or in your living room, and receive push notifications on your phone if movement is detected. This is fascinating technology, no doubt about it, but if your Wi-Fi router can detect motion in your home, what else can it do? What could happen if this information got into the wrong hands? It could be used to track your every move in the most intimate location you have access to. It could be used to decipher when you're home or out of the house. Is your internet service provider legally obligated to hand over this information to law enforcement if they ask for it? Even if they're not, what if someone hacks into these internet service providers and gains access to these databases? In theory, hackers could sell access to this information on the dark web, and anyone, any party who wants to monitor you, could potentially have a full-scale 3D map of your entire home, and you would have no idea. No way of knowing. 99% of people have no idea that the routers in every single modern home are even capable of this. Who's to say it won't be used for mass surveillance, tracking people's movements without their knowledge or consent? We've already seen top-secret mass surveillance projects from the US government in the past, like PRISM and ECHELON that we've already talked about, which have siphoned user data from the world's largest technology companies into our intelligence agencies. Should malicious parties gain access to this information? Well, we've effectively all installed 1984-level citizen surveillance systems into our homes. This is obviously horrifying stuff. I'm not trying to make anyone paranoid here. That's really the last thing that I want. Lately, I've been thinking about how wild some of the claims appear to be on this series, but as you look into them, you realize that a lot of them really are true and based in fact. There have been obviously some conspiracy theories in this iceberg, but stuff like this is proven. Like, this is actually possible with the Wi-Fi routers that are in your home. It's just scary to know that the hardware is already installed in our homes and that the software component could come from federal authorities or cybersecurity failures. I don't know, just kind of scary to think about. Manichaeism. This next entry is pretty wild. Wild in the fact that it's an entire world religion that existed hundreds of years ago that has been all but eradicated and suppressed despite its remarkably universal teachings. The religion was called Manichaeism, and it was spread by a man named Mani in the Persian Empire during the 3rd century. Mani claimed that he was the final prophet in the lineage of those who came before him, namely Buddha, Jesus, and Zoroaster, teaching that they each delivered pieces of the truth, but none of them the full picture. He preached that his task as the final prophet was to unite all of the world's major faiths into a single universal answer. A universal religion that could speak to all people across the globe, regardless of their cultural or geographical origins, since each culture's faith could serve as a starting point. Manichaeism combined the teachings of Plato, Christianity, the pre-Islamic religion of Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Judaism, as well as even more obscure teachings like ancient Greek, Babylonian, and Mesopotamian religions, among other more mysterious religions and cults. Mani also pulled from the suppressed Christian Gnostic movements, adopting the idea that blind faith wasn't enough to liberate one's soul from darkness. Instead, salvation came through understanding, through gnosis, which was knowledge of the true nature of the universe. Mani didn't just borrow from other religions, he wove their teachings into a cohesive whole. For example, from Christianity, he adopted Jesus as a prophet who brought truth. From Buddhism, he embraced asceticism, or intense self-discipline, and the idea of enlightenment through knowledge. And from Zoroastrianism, he implemented the concept of a cosmic battle between good and evil. Manichaeism divided its followers into 2 groups: the elect and the hearers. The elect were the spiritual elite, ascetics who renounced meat, wine, and sex, dedicating their lives to prayer, fasting, and spreading the faith. They were seen as living vessels for collecting and purifying souls. The hearers, on the other hand, were followers who supported the elect with food and resources while following less strict rules. This structure created a community bound by mutual dependence, with the elect serving as spiritual guides and the hearers as their earthly sustainers. Mani preached that the universe was divided into 2 eternal realms: the kingdom of light, ruled by the Father of Greatness, and the kingdom of darkness, governed by the King of Darkness. These 2 realms had existed in harmony until the King of Darkness launched an attack on the Kingdom of Light. In response, the Father of Greatness created a series of divine beings to combat the dark. Mani taught of a figure called the Mother of Life who bore the original man, which was basically the biblical Adam, a pure being sent to battle the forces of evil. But the original man was defeated, with his light trapped in the material world. A chaotic mixture of light and darkness. This material world, which is our world, is where humanity exists, a battleground where light and darkness wage a seemingly eternal war. Mani taught that each of us carries a spark of divine light trapped within our flesh, yearning to return to the source. The purpose of life is to liberate this light through knowledge and ascetic practices, or the avoidance of worldly, evil pleasures and pursuits of self-discipline. Given the suppressed and obscured nature the practice finds itself in today, you might be surprised to learn of the true scale of Manichaeism's spread across humanity at one point in history. Missionaries carried its teachings eastward to China, westward into the Roman Empire, and even into North Africa. It was appealing because it offered a clear explanation for the existence of evil, something that many traditional religions struggled to address, as well as paths to observable self-growth and ultimate salvation that didn't require abandoning one's cultural roots. It likely had millions of followers throughout history, with translations of its texts found in North Africa, Egypt, Italy, the Balkans, Mesopotamia, India, Central Asia, Tibet, and China. Unfortunately, its success was short-lived and came at a massive cost for many of its practitioners and for Mani himself. Manichaeism's universality made it a threat to established religions. In Persia, where Zoroastrianism was the state religion, Mani's claims of being a new prophet were seen as blasphemy, and in 276, under King Bahram I, Mani was arrested, tortured, and died while imprisoned, likely being executed. His followers were hunted down, their scriptures burned, and their communities completely scattered. In the Roman Empire, Emperor Diocletian in 296 issued a book burning ordering the destruction of Manichaean texts and the execution of its leaders. Later Christian emperors like Theodosius I continued this persecution, decreeing death for Manichaean monks and stripping followers of their rights. Manichaeism continued to persist in different corners of the East for a time, namely in China. But in 843, Emperor Wuzong began targeting foreign religions, including Manichaeism, and thousands of Manichaean clerics were killed, their temples razed, and survivors forced to either flee or convert. By the 14th century, with the rise of the Ming Dynasty, Manichaeism became an officially banned practice, with its last remnants completely stamped out. It was believed that its universalist message could upend empires, and as a result, it had to be eradicated, no matter its positive teachings. Manichaeism can still be explored to an extent through relics of surviving texts and artifacts, but most have been lost with centuries of persecution, leaving gaps in our understanding of the practice. This religion is such an enigma, and I'm kind of blown away that I've never heard of it before. It's a real tragedy to me that this religion was stomped out, and the way that it was stomped out, because it really seems like it was pushing for unity of all humanity, and it was ultimately eradicated because it challenged local authorities. You guys will have to let me know if you still like these religious sections in the iceberg, because I know that at the beginning we were doing a lot of different cults and stuff like that. And although I'm definitely interested in that, I'm curious if you guys are more interested in the sort of corporate government expose type stuff instead. I could even potentially do like a lost religions iceberg or some sort of iceberg on mythology. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. The dangers of high-energy particle collision experiments. Deep beneath the Swiss countryside, scientists have built an incredible machine known as the Large Hadron Collider, which I'm sure many of you are already at least vaguely aware of. The LHC is the world's largest and most powerful particle accelerator, built by CERN near Geneva, Switzerland. It's a massive 27-kilometer underground ring lined with superconducting magnets, chilled to temperatures colder than outer space using liquid helium. Inside this tunnel, 2 beams of protons or heavy ions are accelerated in opposite directions to nearly the speed of light, guided by powerful magnetic fields. These beams are kept in ultra-high vacuum tubes to prevent them from interacting with anything but each other. At 4 points around the ring, the beams are smashed together, creating tiny but incredibly energetic collisions. Detectors surrounding these collision points capture the resulting particle showers, allowing scientists to study the fundamental building blocks of the universe. It's an insanely fascinating achievement, and it's being used to make some really groundbreaking discoveries in physics. With all of this being said, though, the kinds of reactions we're triggering down there are of such an experimental nature that many worry CERN is playing with forces we don't fully understand yet. And even if we think we understand them, all it takes is one incident to trigger a chain reaction that could literally end everything we know. The dangers lurking within these high-energy particle collision experiments aren't just theoretical nightmares dreamed up by science fiction writers. They're real possibilities that have been seriously studied by physicists, cosmologists, and safety committees. We're dealing with energies and phenomena that existed at the birth of the universe, and we're doing it in facilities that sit just miles away from major population centers. In fact, the Large Hadron Collider tunnels were actually constructed under residential and agricultural areas. A significant number of housing subdivisions lie right on top of the tunnels and within the confines of the ring on the surface. One of the most widely discussed doomsday events that could theoretically be caused by the collider is a possible microscopic black hole. When particles collide at the incredible energies generated by machines like the LHC, some theoretical models suggest that tiny black holes could be created. In certain theoretical frameworks that include extra dimensions beyond our familiar 3 dimensions of space, the energy requirements for creating black holes drop dramatically. At the LHC's energy levels, these models predict that microscopic black holes could indeed be produced. The standard reassurance from scientists is that these microscopic black holes would evaporate almost instantly due to Hawking radiation. But the scary part is that there's always the possibility that Hawking radiation doesn't work exactly the way we think it does. What if these tiny black holes are more stable than our theories predict? What if a multitude of microscopic black holes were to form, with the number of them rising over fractions of a second, with each particle collision eventually amassing together into a more stable macroscopic black hole? Could it literally eat the Earth from the inside out? Scientists say no, this is extremely unlikely or next to impossible, but we've been wrong before. We're not God. As arrogant as we can be as a species, can we really verify the possibility that something like this won't happen? These microscopic black holes are really just the tip of the iceberg for these potential nightmare scenarios. Something less discussed is the possibility of something known as false vacuum decay. Current measurements suggest that the Higgs field, the invisible energy field that permeates all of space and gives particles their mass, might not be in its lowest possible energy state. Instead, it might be in what physicists call a false vacuum. A state that appears stable but is actually just temporarily stable, like a ball balanced on a hilltop. The horrifying possibility here is that high-energy particle collisions could provide just enough energy to push the Higgs field over the edge, causing it to transition to its true ground state. This would create a bubble of true vacuum that expands outward at the speed of light. As this bubble expands, it would rewrite the fundamental laws of physics within it to fit inside this new lower energy state within the true vacuum. Particles would have different masses, atoms would be unstable, and the chemistry that makes life possible would simply cease to exist. The coding language of the universe, the laws governing the most basic particles to the largest celestial objects, would completely flip on its head. And you wouldn't even see it coming. Nobody would ever even know what happened. The bubble would envelop the Earth in the blink of an eye, and by the time it reached you, everything you know would simply cease to exist. The implications of false vacuum decay go far beyond Earth. If triggered, it could destroy not just our planet, but potentially the entire universe. The bubble of true vacuum would expand outward, obliterating galaxies, stars, and everything else in its path. It would be, in the words of one physicist, the ultimate ecological catastrophe. Then there are strangelets. Hypothetical particles made of what is known as strange matter. In the extreme conditions of high-energy particle collisions, particularly those involving heavy ions like gold or lead nuclei, strange quarks could be produced in sufficient quantities to form stable strangelets. The nightmare scenario with strangelets is that they could be more stable than ordinary atomic nuclei. This means that if a strangelet comes into contact with ordinary matter, it could convert that matter into strange matter, creating a larger, more stable strangelet. This strangelet infection could theoretically spread through all the matter it encounters. Imagine a single strangelet, smaller than an atom, landing on Earth and beginning to convert the matter around it into strange matter, growing larger and more stable with each conversion. Eventually, our entire planet could be transformed into a hyperdense sphere of strange matter. Everything would be roughly the size of a soccer field when all was said and done. These experiments are also creating other forms of exotic matter that we barely understand. The quark-gluon plasma produced in heavy ion collisions recreates the conditions that existed in the first microseconds after the Big Bang. This is a state of matter where the fundamental building blocks of protons and neutrons exist in a free-flowing liquid that's hotter than the core of the sun. We're creating conditions that haven't existed in the universe since the moment of creation itself, and we're doing it in underground laboratories near major cities. The problem is that we don't fully understand how this exotic matter behaves. Could we accidentally create forms of matter that are unstable in ways we haven't anticipated? Some physicists have raised concerns about creating Ice-9 scenarios, forms of matter that catalyze the conversion of ordinary matter into some other, more exotic state. Once started, such a process could be impossible to stop, spreading through the Earth's crust and atmosphere like a plague of transformation. These scenarios could happen so incredibly fast and stem from such incredibly complicated reactions that we could never hope to understand or act upon them in time to save Earth. We'd likely never even observe them. It would literally just be over. The standard response from the scientific community is that cosmic rays have been bombarding Earth for billions of years with similar energies. But the conditions in a particle accelerator are inherently very different from those created when cosmic rays hit the atmosphere. Humanity's best minds will argue that the probability of these events actually happening are very low, and honestly, all we can do is sit and pray and hope that they're right, because there would be no redos after any of these points. There would be no stopping these chain reactions. The universe may hold secrets that are meant to remain hidden. Our relentless pursuit towards knowledge may be leading us into discoveries that we are not prepared to handle. Project 112. Project 112 was a secret and unethical program conducted by the United States Department of Defense during the Cold War from 1962 to 1973. Initiated under President John F. Kennedy's administration, it was part of a comprehensive review of the U.S. military's capabilities, specifically as the 112th project in a series of 150, hence the colloquial name Project 112. The program's primary objective was to investigate biological and chemical warfare agents, focusing on their dissemination through aerosols to achieve controlled temporary incapacitation. This concept aimed to develop weapons that could temporarily disable adversaries without causing permanent harm or death, a goal framed as more humane than lethal alternatives. Despite this stated goal, the execution of Project 112 involved deeply disturbing human experimentation, exposing thousands of military personnel, civilians, and foreign nationals to dangerous substances, often without their permission or even their knowledge. The project began in the early 1960s when Cold War tensions heightened internal fears of chemical and biological attacks. The United States aimed to study how these agents could be used offensively and how to defend against them. Every branch of the U.S. Armed Services contributed funding and personnel, with additional involvement from intelligence agencies, including, obviously, the CIA. How many times has the CIA been mentioned in this iceberg? I'd guess like half the entries on here have had at least some vague connection to the CIA. Anyways, the Desiree Test Center in Fort Douglas, Utah, served as the primary planning and coordination hub for these experiments, which varied widely and were often shocking in their disregard for ethical standards. One of the most troubling aspects was the fact that many participants, primarily military personnel, believed they were volunteering for routine medical tests or training exercises, unaware that they were being exposed to potentially harmful biological or chemical agents. In May 1965, agents from the Special Operations Division of the Army Chemical Corps released Bacillus globigii, a simulant for anthrax at the Greyhound bus terminal and National Airport. Using briefcases to disperse the agent into the air, these covert operations were conducted without notifying local authorities. It's important to note that Bacillus globigii is not anthrax, but it behaves a lot like it in terms of how its spores spread. It was not known to be a dangerous bacterium at the time, but that's not the point. The issue is that civilians were unknowingly exposed and involved in an experiment based entirely on the military's assumption that the bacteria was safe, an assumption backed by limited data at the time. The lack of transparency meant that any adverse effects, even minor ones, were sure to go unmonitored. The following year, from June 7th to the 10th, 1966, New York City's subway system was targeted in a similar experiment under the project. Another bacterium was covertly released by accidentally dropping light bulbs containing the agent onto subway tracks. The goal was to study how such an agent could spread in a confined urban environment. The results suggested that a city-level epidemic could be feasible, a finding that highlighted the potential dangers of biological warfare. As with the Washington, D.C. tests, local police and authorities were not informed, leaving the public vulnerable. Luckily, no widespread health crises were documented from these exposures, but the secrecy and lack of follow-up left open questions especially as research went on to show that vulnerable individuals could in fact face negative health consequences as a result of exposure to the bacterium that was used. Unfortunately, these two experiments are comparatively minor in the full scope of the project. The largest and most controversial component of Project 112 was the smaller Project SHAD, short for Shipboard Hazard and Defense, which focused on sea-based tests during the 1960s. These experiments aimed to assess the vulnerability of U.S. warships to chemical and biological attacks and to develop response procedures. And this is where Project 112 started to get very disturbing. This time, ships like the USS Granville S. Hall were exposed to actual, highly dangerous agents, including sarin, VX nerve gas, and mustard gas. Approximately 6,000 service members, primarily from the Navy and the Army, with some from the Marine Corps and Air Force, participated in these tests, many without being fully informed of the risks. Project SHAD tests also involved biological agents, such as Coxiella burnetii, which causes Q fever, as well as Francisella tularensis, which causes tularemia. These substances were typically disseminated via aerosol sprays from aircraft or ship-mounted sprayers, creating clouds of agents that drifted over the ships. Service members, often wearing minimal or no protective gear, were exposed during these exercises, which simulated actual, real-world chemical and biological attacks on U.S. service members. Many reported immediate symptoms such as respiratory distress, skin irritation, and disorientation, particularly from the nerve agents like sarin and VX, which cause severe neurological effects, even in very low doses. The long-term health impacts on the service members included chronic respiratory conditions, neurological disorders, and cancers, with some veterans, those who were eventually informed of their exposures, linking their illnesses to the experiments. For example, veterans exposed to Q fever reported persistent fatigue and joint pain, while those exposed to nerve agents faced risks of permanent nervous system damage. The lack of any form of immediate medical monitoring and the secrecy surrounding the tests left many service members unaware of their exposure until decades later, complicating diagnosis and treatment. It wasn't until the year 2000 that the VA began requesting information from the Department of Defense about the program, prompted by veterans reporting health issues they believed were linked to their participation. In 2003, Congress, through the Defense Authorization Act, mandated that the DoD identify all Project 112 tests and the personnel potentially exposed, including both service members and civilians. The 1973 CIA MKULTRA file destruction. In 1973, in light of the Watergate scandal ripping through Washington, the CIA became horrified of the possibility that its own secrets could be leaked to the public, revealing the terrifying programs they had been operating without the threat of public scrutiny. As a result of these fears, Richard Helms, then director of the CIA, ordered the complete destruction of all files related to MKUltra, the CIA's secret mind control program. And this wasn't just frivolous paperwork, it was evidence of one of the most sinister experiments in American history. They wanted it gone, erased from existence, to shield the agency from the prying eyes of the public. As we've covered in the past, and as has been covered to death on YouTube and social media in general, MKUltra was launched by the CIA in 1953 with the goal of manipulating human behavior, as well as breaking down and rebuilding personalities for interrogation, espionage, or even darker purposes. Their methods varied widely, involving the secret use of LSD and other hallucinogens, electroshock therapy, radiation exposure, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, and psychological torture. With all of this in mind, it's understandable why the director of the agency responsible wanted all evidence of their crimes to be wiped from any historical record. Unfortunately for the agency, this destruction was only successful in part. Some of the files managed to slip through. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request unearthed a cache of 20,000 documents, mostly financial records, overlooked during the purge. These papers, while not detailing every experiment, offered a window into the program's chilling realities, contributing to the tainted image that the CIA has today. In fact, most of what we know today about MKUltra comes directly from that accidental document discovery in '77. The documents revealed that the CIA had been dosing unsuspecting Americans with LSD, observing their reactions like lab rats. I'm not going to dive too much deeper into the specifics of MKUltra here, because I know most of you are already aware of the specifics of the program. Mostly, I wanted to cover the fact that MKUltra was never supposed to get into the public eye at all, and the fact that there could be other programs like this that have been completely eradicated from records that we'll never even know about. The CIA's shredders made sure that we'll never know the full scope of MKUltra, leaving the darkest depths of the program banished from the public consciousness.
We are not professing to tell you the complete story of these activities. We are professing to tell you the complete story that we know. Right. But these records that we've uncovered don't tell the story. They tell pieces of it.
As a result, we are left trying to piece together a nightmare from fragments. At least 1,000 people were experimented on from what we know, with dozens to hundreds likely suffering significant, lasting psychological or physical harm. MKUltra happened decades ago at this point, and the fact that almost everything we know about it comes from this one cache of files that we just happened to find on accident leads me to believe that much of the truths surrounding MKUltra may never actually break through into the public. There are still major gaps in our understanding of what actually happened, and with all of the people who actually participated slowly starting to be picked off just due to old age, I don't know, it's hard to say what we might actually be able to find out in the future as time goes on. The Heresy of Apokatastasis. Apokatastasis is the alternative Christian idea that every single soul, saints and sinners alike, even the worst of the worst, will one day be purified and reconciled with God. No eternal hell and no one left behind. Guaranteed eternity in paradise. It's an intriguing and comforting idea, of course, but for reasons you might already be able to see, particularly in light of the prophesied eventual judgment of humanity, it's problematic in the context of Christian teachings. The idea posits that God's love and power are so immense that they will ultimately reconcile all of creation back to Him, including those who have been damned. The belief is part of Christian universalism, a broader belief that all people will ultimately be saved through Christ, potentially even the devil himself and other fallen angels. Proponents of apokatastasis and Christian universalism point to the New Testament's mention of the, quote, restoration of all things in Acts 3:21, which appears to challenge traditional views of eternal punishment. Acts 3:21 states, "Heaven must receive him until the time comes for God to restore everything, as he promised long ago through his holy prophets." In the 3rd century, Origen of Alexandria proposed that through Christ, all rational beings would be restored to their original state of unity with God. Origen's vision was one of cosmic reconciliation, where even the devil and fallen angels would be redeemed through a process of purification. However, his critics argue that his belief undermines the seriousness of sin and the necessity of repentance, which obviously is central to modern Christian tradition. These critics fear that the dispersal of Origen's ideas could lead to moral laxity and end up leading others to sin and away from the discipline necessary by traditional Christian teachings. Martin Luther, centuries later, would reject the idea, interpreting the restoration of all things as the day of resurrection and the judgment of all humans, not the redemption of the wicked. Nearly 300 years later, in AD 543, the Synod of Constantinople was convened by Byzantine Emperor Justinian I to condemn certain theological teachings attributed to Origen. These condemnations, known as the 15 Anathemas against Origen, rejected ideas such as the pre-existence of souls and the universal salvation of all beings, including the ultimate restoration of demons and the devil. 10 years later, at the Second Council of Constantinople in 553, a council representing the Catholic Church, it was declared, "If anyone says or thinks that the punishment of demons and of impious men is only temporary, let him be anathema." In simpler terms, apokatastasis, the belief that all beings will ultimately be restored to God, is considered officially heretical in Catholic doctrine. Central to apokatastasis is the belief in God's boundless power to cleanse and redeem. Early Christian thought often portrayed this idea as God's destined victory over evil, involving a purgatorial state where souls are purified rather than punished for eternity. Gregory of Nyssa, for instance, compared the punishment of souls to gold refined in a furnace, suggesting that divine fire separates good from evil, a process that is painful but ultimately restorative, potentially leading to the salvation of all. This perspective posits that God's love is so powerful that it can transform even the most corrupted souls, aligning with the idea that no one is beyond redemption, that no one is outside the merciful reach of God. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 through 6, God's desire for all to be saved is laid out. God our Savior, who wants all people to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. For there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all people. Again, it's comforting, the idea that the one true God, regardless of where you have placed your faith, will one day cleanse you and redeem you and everyone you love of the evils of the earth, and that we will all share in eternal paradise. This sounds like the natural line of thinking that God would choose if he truly wants all his people to be saved, right? However, from what I've pieced together, it's a bit more complicated than that. In Genesis, God gives Adam and Eve a choice when presented with the fruit of knowledge. He commands them, "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." This choice implies that God created man and woman to have free will, that they have been given the power of choice, specifically the choice to obey or disobey the God that has shown them only love and life. My point is that God has given humanity the ability to choose him or to choose their own desires. He will not stop them from choosing their own paths, even if those paths follow disobedience and sin rather than the goodness of God. Anything else could be interpreted as controlling or even tyrannical. With this in mind, if we go back to the original quotation from earlier from Acts 3:21 and we zoom out a bit to get the context from the lines before and after, we see that the section upon which apokatastasis hinges itself is actually taken from a passage which teaches the exact opposite message. Acts 3:19 through 21 links repentance and conversion to the blotting out of sins, suggesting that a change of heart is integral to God's restorative plan. The full quotation is as follows: "Repent then and turn to God so that your sins may be wiped out. that times of refreshing may come from the Lord, and that he may send the Messiah, who has been appointed for you, even Jesus. Heaven must receive him until the time comes for God to restore everything, as he promised long ago through his holy prophets. For Moses said, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You must listen to everything he tells you. Anyone who does not listen to him will be completely cut off from their people." Passages like these are often used by critics of universal salvation to claim that they are a sort of info hazard and that the dissemination of these ideas at all is dangerous. Christian authorities have believed throughout modern history that these kinds of ideas could lead people towards sinning again, believing that there's almost no consequence in the long run, that they would eventually all make it to heaven no matter what. As a result, many of Origen's ideas have been suppressed and are now largely obscured.